Hello, my name is Amy Nat, and this is All Things Aging.
And I'm Amy Obst, editor of Outreach NC, our monthly publication. And today we're talking about tips for successful aging.
Yes, something we can all use.
So one thing that makes something successful is knowing what success looks like and
Exactly.
being able to define it for yourself so
Yes.
you know when you get there.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the research has shown, but yeah, definitely how you define successful aging is very specific to what your priorities are as you get older and what things are important to your quality of life. So we're going to sort of go through some general things and then talk about how you can sort of individualize those things to enhance your own quality of life.
And I think thinking about it is good because sometimes we think we know, but until we sit down and really kind of like map it out,
Right.
It can be easy to be on autopilot.
Definitely.
All right, so what does the research show?
So if you look at people who report being kind of satisfied with what the aging process has been, or basically just, people talk about those golden years and you think it's going to be all happy and whatnot. And so when you look at research and you look at what things are consistently happening in people's lives that report sort of a higher satisfaction level. So greater participation in activities, social connections, seems to make sense, good family relationships, spending time doing things you enjoy. That seems like a really obvious one, but some people start to give up the things that they enjoy as they get older. And so people that have stayed engaged in those activities tend to report a higher quality of life. Financial stability, that's something that a lot of people worry about as they get older. So those who report feeling financially stable in their later years report a higher quality of life as well. And then not surprisingly, independence. And this, directly correlates with mobility, driving, which I'm sure no one's surprised about, and decision making. Those are sort of the three areas that when people feel like they have independence in those, that it enhances their feeling of successful aging.
That's interesting because if you look at all of those, I would say that they apply to all
Right.
stages of life, and sometimes we don't think about it in the context of later
and
life.
As people are living longer, and if you look at just the advances in technology, the advances in medical treatments, the advances in preventative care, we've seen that people are living longer. But as that's happened, people have realized that there's a value in quality of life over quantity of life. And so while we have all these things that can sort of add to the quantity or the number of years that we live, people are really going back to kind of purposeful living. We've done some podcasts on that and looking at what is going to make their quality of life better.
So what are the components of a high quality of life as we're aging?
So this is something that's been around. Actually, it's one of the things in grad school that I learned that made me want to go into gerontology. So there were some researchers many years ago, Rowe and Kahn, and we'll actually try to show this visual up on the screen, but they did this sort of model of healthy aging. And so if you sort of have three components to that. So one of them is good health. So people who have a low risk of disease and disability, that is one component. The second component was having high cognitive and physical functioning, right? So being able to engage in those relationships in life and connections. And then the third was just activity, engagement with life. So those people tended to have more emotional well-being. And so those three components together sort of dictated how a person was going to experience life in the aging process.
So physical, mental, and emotional.
Again, seems like something that we would all just sort of have at any stage in life, that you can, if you really think about it and look at it, you can figure out for yourself or for a loved one, maybe two of the three are going really well, but there's something in that third area that's a challenge and something that you can help increase somebody's quality of life by addressing that.
Well, with all the changes, with retirement or family changes, I can see how those start to change.
Right.
But we're not tracking.
Right.
What are the challenges to the aging experience?
So we talked about the importance of independence and mobility. More than 35% of older adults aged 65 and over have some type of mobility limitation. So as we talked about independence being really important to quality of life, you can see where that would have an impact. And then over 25% of older adults tend to have some type of mental health challenge, whether it be anxiety, depression, some type of cognitive decline. And so those two factors, the mobility and then the independence in good mental health seem to really impact a person as they age, and those things particularly create challenges.
So what would be the 10 tips that you would come up
Right,
with
so
to
we're
really
gonna
address those challenges and focus on those components that you mentioned of aging
right,
well?
because there are certainly things that fall within the normal aging process, but there are also things that as a person gets older and in life in general is sort of out of your control, right? If you do have a chronic health condition, or a spouse dies, or there are just some things that happen that are sort of out of your control. So we're going to talk about several tips and several things, because maybe some of these would be applicable and still able to enhance somebody's quality of life, where some things that maybe aren't in your control you wouldn't necessarily be able to change, but you certainly can make have better coping mechanisms, I think.
Well, I think too, when you change one thing, it never fails that everything else changes.
Sometimes.
So sometimes you don't have to change all areas of your
Right.
life. If you just go for a walk every day, it's going to affect your sleep, your mental health, your relationship, all of it. So there's a cascade effect.
Definitely. So one of the things that, things we can't control would be good genetics. And so that's not necessarily a tip, but a tip would be recognizing maybe what you're genetically predispositioned to as you age, maybe looking at grandparents, parents, great-grandparents, things like that, and then making sure that those are things that you were sort of getting on top of earlier in life, that you're doing preventative care, that you're aware of what those health risks may be, so that if you need to make lifestyle changes, you can do that before you reach 70 or 80 and it's having an impact on your everyday life.
It's funny because I hear people all the time say, well, my neighbor smoked and,
Right.
drank whiskey.
He was
till he
101.
died. But that's different.
Genetics,
The genetics, everything else, the environment, everything can be very different.
It all combines to sort of create the experience, but having an awareness of that is important for sure. Health and lifestyle. So a quote I like is, if I had known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. And sometimes people don't realize that until maybe they start experiencing mobility issues, and they're like, oh, I wish I had started walking, 10 years ago. And so sometimes it's really making a conscious effort to do things that create that healthy lifestyle for you. That ties right into exercise. That doesn't only apply to the body, but to the brain. And I think it's important to note what I do for exercise in my 20s is different than my 30s and my 60s and my 80s, but certainly you can adapt that and get out for a walk, or do stretches with a stretch band, or do crossword puzzles or Sudokus or something. But they say use it or lose it. So
yes, I just saw a video the other day for mahjong tips, and I thought, I want to learn to play mahjong.
Learning new things is
Yes.
very good to create new neural pathways. So exercising body and brain. Healthy coping skills. So we talked about some things in life are out of your control, but if you develop healthy coping skills, then when those things happen, you're going to be more able to deal with those. And you as a counselor certainly work with people on what's a healthy coping skill.
My favorite one
Okay.
is whenever you find yourself having a negative thought,
Right.
especially about yourself, about a situation, our tendency is to want to flip it to a positive. Sometimes there isn't a positive. So work toward neutral instead of I overate again and I'm, a failure. Just I overate again, period. It's neutral. It's not good or bad. It's just what it is. So trying not to spiral down into the negative. Working toward neutral is easier for people to do, and it'll stop. So think of that neural groove that's really deep of negative thoughts about yourself or something. You want to let that grow over with weeds, and you want to get a new path going of positive, and it takes a lot of work. But if every time you have a negative thought, you just gently go toward neutral, it'll really help improve your mood.
Well, that leads right into our next tip, which is having a positive attitude. Outlook and attitude definitely does make a difference in your day-to-day life. And so sort of being aware, I guess, of what your day-to-day attitude is, and how, when things happen, you respond to them. Like you said, getting back to neutral, so then you can shift back to that positive. But it really does make a difference. We all know people who are chronically unhappy, complaining, negative, and everything seems to go wrong. And then so it does make a difference, and that positive attitude can really be helpful.
Well, and whatever you're thinking affects your physical, your heart rate, your
It's all
breathing,
related.
all of it's
Yeah.
so related. So you'll help your body with a better attitude, and your brain and your mood and all of those things. And think about what you want, not what you don't want.
Right, put it
So-
out there in the universe.
Yeah, well, I ask clients all the time, what do you want? And they're like, well, I don't want to be. And
yeah.
you always
yeah.
want to tell me what you want, not what you don't want.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Preventative planning. And so we've done several episodes on preventative planning. So we won't get into that in great detail, but one way to stay in control or feel more in control of your life, especially as you get older and there are things maybe that are out of your control, is to do some preventative planning, to do the estate planning that we've talked about, to do financial planning, even thinking about where you might want to live if you needed to downsize, which we've done episodes on as well, or would no longer be able to stay at home. So instead of waiting for something to happen and then reacting to that, think about doing more preventative planning. And in that comes realistic thinking. Right. So,
which is again a little neutral.
Yeah. Most people, if I say, where do you want to be when you're 85? Where would you like to be living?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. In a mansion.
Oh, full staff and
horses outside my window.
I mean, most people sort of see themselves being at home or being, I want to stay here in my home and or I want to go to this big glamorous retirement resort, but those are great, but being realistic about that as well. And okay, well, what happens if there are safety issues? What happens if I needed a wheelchair? What happens if my financial situation was such that I really needed to budget? And so having that idea of what you want life to look like in those golden years is great, but realistic planning is even more important, I think.
So do you encourage clients to have a worst case scenario plan?
I like to think of it as plan A, plan B, plan C, right? So plan A is what you really, really would love to have happen. Plan B is, well, if that doesn't work out, this would be the second best. And then plan C is if something catastrophic happened, if there was a crisis. If I had a major stroke and wasn't able to communicate for myself, like if something happened out of my control like that, then what might I want my life to look like, and documenting that and communicating that. So we'll call it plan C instead of worst case scenario.
But it's good to do that because there's a lot of peace that comes in just saying I have a plan regardless of the level.
And that it's your plan and that you had a say in it.
Right.
One of the things I found interesting going back to my grad school days was I'd read a study on what determined if a person adjusted to moving into a facility, because there was these statistics that you place someone and they would die within 1 year. And so I thought, doesn't sound good. And so one of the things though that made a really big factor in how that person adjusted was it their decision, or did they have some say in the decision and where they ended up? And so just feeling like you have that sense of control, or you have input on the decisions for your life, which is that planning ahead, makes a big difference in how you adjust and cope with the things that do happen. So I think that's good. All right. Positive social relationships. That seems like that would be just a given, but if you think about people as they're getting older, sometimes friends move away, friends die, sometimes there are health conditions, and so people tend to become more isolated. There can be a lot of depression, anxiety, like we talked about, just feeling lonely. Even family relationships can become estranged, and so promoting and repairing and having those positive social and family relationships definitely add to that feeling of sort of successful aging or quality of life as one ages.
Well, I think too, I've seen a lot of people become isolated when something changes at their church. They get a new pastor, or there's some sort of upheaval, or
that was their social network.
And that was their social network, and they think, well, I'm too old to go to a new church, or I don't want to try something new, and so this huge part of their life is gone. And so I think being able to grieve that and then being flexible to what are we going to replace it with.
That's where you modify it. So I had a client, and she was an avid bridge player, so sharp, and bridges too, I haven't figured it out yet, but it's a pretty complicated. You have to be able to use your cognitive abilities, and so when she started having some cognitive issues, she was sort of getting shut out by these bridge groups that she'd played with for years, and she was depressed and she felt isolated, and so we could really work with her. We linked her with a new group at the Senior Enrichment Center that were playing cards, but more simplified versions and a little more forgiving than some of their bridge groups, and it made a huge difference. That reconnecting in the social environment, but also learning the new game was good, for her mental health and for her cognitive functioning. And so, sometimes the social interactions change, but they're important to find new ones when that happens. So.
I'm going to up my pickleball game to the point where I can show up.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when you can't do that, you can do cheer. Really.
Yes.
We have something for everyone. All right. So number 9 would be long-term financial planning. And if you think about it, that really has to do with, again, realistic expectations. If you needed to go to an assisted living, what does that cost? How long could you do that? If you needed to have care in the home, what does that cost? How do you do that? And certainly there are plenty of older adults that are dealing with even finding money for housing, having enough money for medications, having enough money for food. And so kind of knowing what the financial kind of nutshell is that you're going to have to work with, and what happens when that's gone, how would you qualify for Medicaid, when does Medicare kick in, like knowing kind of what that's going to play out is important so that you can plan realistically and feel that you have the financial resources that you need or know how to secure those resources you need.
We've talked a lot in other episodes about trying to avoid planning in a crisis,
right?
Making decisions in a crisis.
Right.
A care facility might require several months of being on a wait list or something like that. So it's not something to decide.
Yeah, it's always better to sort of have some of this decision making done before the crisis so you can make better decisions. And then lastly, end of life planning. And so some people go, it doesn't sound like successful aging if you're planning for end of life, but it goes back to keep doing it your way, right? So even right now at my age, I can think about what would I want for the end of my life? Where do I want to be? Do I want to be cremated? Do I want to be buried? Where, what do I want that to look like? Would I want hospice or palliative care if I had a terminal disease, or would I want to live closer to one of my kids? Just knowing kind of what you would want and documenting that is one, very helpful to the people around you who are taking care of you. But again, it's a way to stay in control of how life goes and sort of how you age, even if there are challenges. So it definitely is a factor and contributes to quality of life and successful aging.
So why is it important to have tips and to do all of this planning and thoughtfulness and preparing?
I think at any age, life sort of gets busy. We get used to our routines and our patterns, and sometimes we're not purposeful about or intentional about these things that really can add to our quality of life. So even though some of them seem obvious and like, oh, well, yeah, everyone would do that, people stop doing some of those things. And so if you really want to focus on optimal quality of life, of having kind of that sense of autonomy that we talked about, it's important. Even many older adults say they don't want to be a burden to their children. That's when I ask, what's the one thing you would want as you get older? I don't want to be a burden to my children. So by doing these things that we've talked about, right, you're reducing that, and you're putting in place those resources and that support network that you need to have the most positive experience you can. So I think it's important.
I would imagine too that when they say I don't want to be a burden, they're thinking of caregiving. But I think having to make those decisions would be a huge emotional toll.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I just want to touch on is, we learn there are family and generational patterns, right? Mm-hmm. So when I think about what kind of grandparent I want to be someday, I think about my grandmother taking me camping, playing cards with me, right? Doing these things with me. And so when you're setting a positive example in life as you get older, it's amazing how that trickles down to other generations, or it doesn't even have to be family, but other people in your circle or in your church or in your social network that watch you having this sort of intentional positive experience, and that you're really serving as a role model. So you're having an impact on future generations. And I think that's a powerful thing to give back as well.
One of the biggest surprises in becoming a counselor has been so many of my clients might have had difficulties in childhood, and their grandparents played a huge role in mitigating any kind of harm or giving them this loving, accepting place. They learned from them. They constantly go back to those memories with their grandparents.
Yeah, it makes an impact. Since we're going on the grad school theme today, one of the things that stuck with me and that I learned, so Erickson came up with these stages of development, right? Starting with when we're born, and there's sort of certain things that we do all through life to sort of pass on to that next stage. And so the two of those that he defined that sort of are meant for adulthood and into older age is generativity versus stagnation, right? So do you feel that you have contributed, or do you feel that you've sort of stagnated? And it was very important for people to feel like they have given back, and especially to the next generation. And then at the end of life, it becomes integrity versus despair. And so, have you done things the way that sort of you wanted? And do you have that sense of integrity, or are you really struggling, with that sense of despair? And so by helping people that we love and do these things that lead to sort of successful aging, I think we're really helping them move through those phases and having a quality of life. So,
well, as always, I learn every time I talk to you.
Gonna go home and do some successful tips. All right, thank you.
Thank you.